Welcome, everybody, to the October 2019 meeting of the Dallas-Fort Worth SharePoint and Office 365 user group. I'm joined today by my fellow co-host, Mr. Paul McCollum. Paul, how are you, sir?
Very good, sir. Very good, sir. Thank you.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Some of our typical cast that you're familiar with are in Seattle at a Microsoft event. So we won't be hearing from them. That would be Jennifer, Corey, and I believe Chris as well. But they've been kind enough to contribute some content to the slide deck for us. And so we'll go through those in our typical order. We're also joined by Dimitri. You're going to have to pronounce your last name correctly or I'm going to butcher it. Dimitri
Ayrapetov.
Ayrapetov, there you go, who will be talking to us today about Microsoft Flow, which is a good topic. We've got quite a few folks signed up and registered. So as people start filtering in here, we will get going. A few housekeeping items up front. If you are having issues with the live stream audio and or video, there is a webinar mode that you can invoke from the panel. This will put you into a streaming format, slightly delayed. You won't be able to do Q&A and interact with the chat. However, you will get a much improved audio and video experience. So feel free to use that if you are having some issues. Also, we have found that Chrome is the browser that works best. If you are going to use it, fire up a default blank profile in that browser, and that will improve the experience for you a little bit. EdgeEM works okay. The Chrome Edge sort of hybrid that Microsoft has created, IE doesn't work very well at all. It seems Firefox is okay, and of course it depends on what platform you're on. But if you need to, fall back to the webinar mode. If you have questions during the presentation, we have the chat and QA available. You can hit us with your questions there. Paul and I will moderate those and give questions to Dimitri as he moves through his presentation. He's got quite a lot of demo to go through with you today, and he's informed me that he will pause at the end of each section to allow you to ask questions and allow him to answer those questions. The slide deck, our slide deck, this intro deck here has already been published in the handouts. You can head on over there. After the session, I'm assuming Dimitri will give us some sort of link to where you can get his content. He can always send it to us and we can post it with a link on the channel. For those of you watching this after the live presentation, all of our videos are available on our YouTube channel. We've got a link a little later that you can go check out on that. So feel free to browse through our catalog of previous sessions. And so let's jump right in. First of all, thank our sponsors. If any of our sponsors are on the webinar, please hit us up in the chat window. We're happy to give you a couple of minutes to talk about your products and services to everyone that has joined us. I want to thank, of course, K2, the longest running sponsor of the DFW SharePoint and Office 365 group. So we definitely appreciate them. Training Plus, Sundown Solutions, and BinaryWave are our platinum sponsors. In addition, we have our gold sponsors, TrippLite, Ampio Solutions, and SparkHound. Ampio and SparkHound. If you are on the presentation, please do let me know if you'd like to say anything to the attendees. I mentioned our video last month's, all of the webcasts are available on our Big Marker channel. You can see it there. There's the link. If you want to get these links in the deck, you can head on over to Handouts and download the deck. Also, there's a link to our YouTube channel where all of the videos are posted about a week or so after the webinar is live. We get those all encoded and moved over to our YouTube channel, so you can look for them there. You will get an email. If you've registered already for the event, you'll get an email telling you when the videos are available, and you can check them out on the platform of your choice. Upcoming events. Obviously, Microsoft Ignite, it is sold out at this point. There are no tickets available left. If you have friends in high places, perhaps you can score yourself a trip to Ignite. Hotels are also hard to come by, but you never know. Might be worth going and giving it a go, see if you can get into the event. Of course, Paul, they put a lot of that on video shortly after, don't they? I think
Sorry,
Paul is.
a little bit of a lag for me to get to the mute button. Yeah, no, we have seen just about all of those events put their videos live afterwards. I think the last SharePoint NA had all of the sessions available.
Yeah, so that's
for sure. The penetration of the rest, I'm not sure of.
Yeah, it'd be a good way to catch up on content if you miss it live, since it's already sold out. So you can look for that. Shortly afterwards, we have Office and SharePoint Live again in Orlando from the 17th to the 22nd. There are still spots available for that. That's a great event being held near Universal Studios in one of those hotels over there. I will be there along with several other folks from the community that you know. So I will be in Orlando twice. In November. Not sure what I did to get punished like that, but nevertheless, I will be in Orlando. And then shortly afterwards, actually, I will be flying from Orlando to Portugal for a SharePoint Saturday event in Lisbon. So quite busy in the month of November. And then just after that is SharePoint Fest. Is December 9th to the 13th in Chicago. I'm sure there are probably spots available for that as well. So please do sign up for that. And then you can check out the Office 365 Pulse YouTube channel with weekly updates from what's happening in Office 365. Our very own Jennifer Roth is part of that webcast. So be sure to check her out over there and all the content that they have to share. I'm sure there will be a ton of content coming from Ignite, various podcasts, happening. I know the Office Dev podcast will be happening over there, and the Cloud Show, and quite a few others will be happening. So a ton of content coming out of Ignite, including our special webinar series. We are currently booked for one day from the Podcast Center, but we plan to bring our event live to you every day while we're there, just slightly ahead of the time of this webinar. We're shooting for 1:30 in the afternoon Central Time. To bring that to you. We'll be on for about an hour. We'll have groups of various MVPs, previous speakers that we can corral into coming and hanging out with us. If you were on our very first webcast from Las Vegas, you should be familiar with the format. We'll just grab folks as they wander within our reach and have them talk about the things that they have heard that day, what's been presented, the announcements that Microsoft has made. I suspect, as usual, there will be a lot of announcements coming out of Ignite. And more than we can certainly cover in a single 1 hour session. So that's why we're bringing you multiple ones. That will be published here in the next few days. You can sign up to the entire series. And we'll also have our regular cast and crew on when they can fit in. So Paul and Chris and Jennifer and Corey and quite a few others, we'll rope them in as they have time to join us to give us their thoughts on the event as well. So that'll be fun. Look on our Big Marker channel. You'll all get an email on that as it happens. Some news that provided here. Jen popped in with a few updates. Obviously things are a bit quiet prior to Ignite, although I think Paul has quite a bit to share from an updates perspective on the flow side. But from the end user spotlight, Jen says there are some updated SharePoint start page experiences. That's that home page when you first come into SharePoint. There's a UX refresh coming for that to help you better get to content. So improve that whole sort of followed sites and things you've done recently experience. That should be coming soon. I suspect you'll see a lot of this in the initial announcements from Ignite, certainly glimpses of it in the keynote. Form customization in SharePoint lists and libraries, so you can change, move fields around, change their order, and whether they're shown or hidden or whatnot. Just gives you an easier way, I think, to do what we've normally done sort of backstage in the settings, but more front and center within the page itself. There's some new templates coming for issues, contacts, and the datasheet view. So modern support for things like issue tracking, the custom list, datasheet view new. and existing ones will appear in the modern UI by default. So some improvements coming there to that way lists are viewed and various types of lists. So that's all good news. Chris Webb reports in with some updates to Teams, PSTN call usage reports. If you are using the calling features of Teams, that will be a great improvement to see how that is being used within your organization. Secondary ringer option, reverse caller ID, see who's calling if they have an Azure ID account or a telco display name. Pardon me. Meet Now button on the calendar tab, that'll be handy. And you can now pin a user to a camera view during meetings. So those are some of the updates coming in Teams. I don't think we got an update on the developer content this month from Corey. So I think these links are from last month, but the graph sample data packs are still out there. You should be able to find the October update from the development community. If they have posted it yet, should be out there on that similar channels. Just go to the SharePoint development blogs, and I'm sure you'll be able to find the link. The community call, if it's already happened, will also be out there along with the SPFX one. So just go out and hit those links there, and you'll be able to find links to the latest stuff for this month if it has happened already. All right, Mr. McCollum, talk to us about some flow.
Yeah, so stumbled across this. I didn't get updated last month, but the news was going around, but it just didn't hit their blog until fairly recently. But October 1st, a lot of new features were lit up in flows. The full list I have on that link there. Hopefully you can grab that. And I grabbed the top ones that stood out that went to general, to GA this month. So flows running from a geofence. That'll be interesting. I am not sure. I'm going to go grab that one as soon as we get off this call and find out whether that's tagged to web access, whether somebody's doing something through the web interface, or whether that's initiated from Teams and the Teams app running, because where you've got to have GPS coordinates, so it's really got to come from an app source. But I'll go dig into that. That could be interesting to set up some routines for people based on where they're at. Being able to share flows as templates. Right now, you have to share pretty much the entire content of your flow. You can't just hand somebody a working skeleton and share it. You have to give them full access. And while you can copy the source code, it does include stuff that you may not want. AI Builder. For some smart next best activity guessing based on patterns and the AI platform. Again, another batch of admin connectors so that you can hook up to different data sources. I think I saw a couple of different chat systems and some different data providers. And then they're adding resource and capacity governance to the admin console. So that you can tell they've got some. They're toying with, it seems like, premium connectors and premium activities, stuff that may take more CPU than the average unit if you're doing stuff in a loop or things that kind of hang around. So they've got to kind of tick-tock the usage governance so that they can keep that in check and report that into the admins. And then commandlets for PowerShell, and I'm not sure whether or not it can run PowerShell commandlets or whether there are PowerShell commandlets for flow that you can call from other systems. But that's out there. That's out there in detail. And like I said, I stumbled across that this morning, and looking forward to going and digging in on it.
Excellent. Good stuff coming in. And I assume we'll see a lot more stuff from Ignite as well in the flow space. That won't be any surprise.
Seems like, yeah, there was a huge run on all of the Power Apps, but that was just the flow components.
Yeah, indeed. So we are actually a truly global podcast for you today. I am broadcasting to you from my office in the west of England, Cheltenham, out near Gloucester Way. Paul is back home in sunny DFW. And we have Dimitri coming to us from the Boston area on the East Coast. So without any further ado, I will allow Dimitri to introduce himself and carry on with his presentation. Just a reminder, folks, if you have questions, please pop them into the chat window. We'll be happy to respond to those as we go through. I'm going to be looking for opportunities to flip those questions over to Dimitri so they can get answered for you. So Dimitri, my man, take it away.
All right, thanks, Eric, and thanks, Paul, for the intro. Let me share my screen here. And there we go. So everyone, thanks for joining today. In the next 45 minutes to an hour or so, we'll walk through getting started with Microsoft Flow. So just one quick slide about me. I'm a digital partner at Turn Digital, and I've been working in this industry for over 15 years. Most of it has been in the consulting space, working with large-scale projects in the Fortune 500 space, helping companies do some really great things with SharePoint and in the more recent history, Office 365. I've also co-founded the Boston Office 365 user group about 5 years ago here in the Boston area. Similar to this user group, we also broadcast our sessions online, so feel free to come check us out if you're interested. For today's agenda, we want to start off with a few slides just covering a little bit about the history of Flow, or workflows rather, talk about Microsoft Flow, and then dive into 3 hands-on demos. As Eric mentioned, this is recorded, so feel free to play back the recording and follow along with me after this session is over. So let's dive right into it. So if we look at workflows in SharePoint 2003, there wasn't really any kind of official workflow engine. There were some third-party workflow engines available, but you were really just stuck if you were looking to do something simple out of the box. With SharePoint 2007, we were introduced to a very basic workflow engine. It had its own challenges, and if you built a workflow that was a little bit too large, it would crash in an unrecoverable state. But for the most part, it got the job done, and it was really the start of workflows in SharePoint as we know it. In SharePoint 2010, we were upgraded with the Windows Workflow Foundation, which was a new attempt by Microsoft to build a unified workflow engine that could be used across applications, including SharePoint. And SharePoint 2010 workflows solved a lot of the challenges that SharePoint 2007 had, but it still
Dimitri,
wasn't.
if you can hear me, I think that we've lost your audio, or at least I have.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry about that. I'm not
Okay,
sure what happened.
sorry, probably just on my end. Carry on.
All right. So coming back to here, in SharePoint 2010, we've had access to the Windows Workflow Foundation, which gave us access to a new workflow product at the time, which would let us build workflows across different applications, not just specific to SharePoint. And while it was tremendously better than SharePoint 2007's workflow engine, there was still a lot to be desired. Fast forward one step forward, we have a new workflow engine yet again in SharePoint 2013 called Workflow Manager. In this scenario, the Workflow Manager lived externally to SharePoint. So if you had a workflow that crashed, you wouldn't necessarily bring down your entire farm. But things have really evolved in the workflow space outside of Microsoft's first-party workflows quite a bit with third-party products like K2, Nintex, and others. And a lot of people were looking at Microsoft to see what the next greatest thing would be. So here, this brings us to introducing Microsoft Flow. So Microsoft's Flow is a cloud-based software as a service workflow engine that was introduced in 2016. And as of today, there's over 150 different connectors that you can interface with this workflow engine. So each connector you can think of as a data source, and being available in the cloud, it has a lot of cloud native connectors. But if you're looking to use this for on-premises data sets, on-premises systems, there's also different ways that you can connect that using different data gateways. And with that, there's also over 1,000 different templates that are available within the Flow marketplace at no cost to let you really jumpstart your automation. We'll show a little bit of that as we go through the demos, but essentially, if you're looking to do something, the chances are it's already been done, it's already been published, and it could be as simple as picking a template, plugging in your credentials with the different services, and then publishing it and getting it ready to go. So before we dive into the demos, I want to go over a few concepts with Microsoft Flow. So every single flow begins with a trigger, and then it proceeds with a set of actions. Triggers could be things like an item being uploaded to a SharePoint list, or it could be an email received from a specific email address. It could be a OneDrive file being modified. And really, these triggers boil down to a few categories that we'll talk about. One being something that happens automatically, something that happens on a set schedule, and the third, which is something that happens when a user initiates it. Actions are things that you want to do based on the triggers that are being triggered. So you can copy items, you can send emails, you can create users. Essentially, all of your actions within your SharePoint Designer workflows are equivalently available in Flow. And lastly, a template is just a predefined collection of triggers and the subsequent actions behind it. And as we go through the 3 demos today, you'll see a variety of different ways that workflows could be triggered, as well as different items that could be happened by stringing different actions together. So this brings us to our first demo. Our first demo is a fairly common scenario, and this is where somebody might upload a document, mark it as final, and submit it to their manager for approval. So with this, we're going to start with a document library for final drafts, and then we'll build a flow that will submit that to the user's manager, and then we'll alert the user after the manager approves it or rejects it. So I'm going to switch my screen over here into a modern SharePoint site. So this is my SharePoint user group demo site collection that I use for all different types of demos. And to get started, I've pre-created a document library here called Final Drafts. This is your ordinary document library, nothing special happening here. But what we'd like to do is that when somebody uploads a final draft here and is ready to ask their manager to approve it, we want the user to be able to select that file and essentially route it for approval. So the first thing that we'll do is that we'll click on this Flow button here that you see in the ribbon. If you're licensed for Flow, you should see this button appear in all modern lists and libraries. And it's a really simple way to get started. So clicking on Flow, we can have a few options. We have the ability to create a flow. We have the ability to see our flows. We have the ability to configure flows. Now, whether or not you start your workflow or your flow creation process from this location, or if you start it by going to your home page and clicking on the flow icon, in any case, you'll be able to accomplish the same exact information. The big difference is that if you start with this document library, it'll pre-populate some of your fields for you, including which site the flow should run and listen for triggers upon, as well as which list or library it's attached to. If we click Create a Flow here, we see the right panel fly out, and that gives us a few different options. We can click See More, and if we go to the bottom, we can see even more templates. So this takes me to the first thing that I want to show, which is the templates. The templates could be accessed this way, or we can click on Templates on the left side. And these are predefined triggers as well as actions. So without spending a lot of time going through these, the best way to get started with templates is to really use the search engine. And if we come to the top, so for example, let's say we want to use SurveyMonkey to get a survey and then take action on it. Just by typing in the word survey, we're able to see the different connectors that are available here. So things like Power Apps or Flow or Tasks. If we type in specifically the name of a connector, I think SurveyMonkey might be one word, we'll see different actions available. And clicking into any of these templates will automatically show us where it's coming from, where it's going to, and within that, we'll be able to create it. You'll notice that some of these connectors are premium connectors, which require one level higher of license than what comes out of the box with Office 365. So for some of these, you might want to be mindful if it makes sense to pay for the connector or build a different workaround. Anyways, let's jump back to our demo. So we're going to click on the Create button. And the first thing you see when you click on the Create button are the different types of triggers that are available to you. So an automated flow is something that happens automatically. So somebody uploads a file or an email comes into a mailbox, and then we take action right away. There's the instant flow. So this is manually triggered, being if I pick a document and say route it for approval, or if I have a flow button on my mobile app. The instant flow happens as soon as a user clicks start the workflow. A scheduled flow is something that you might want to configure to run on a periodic basis. So for some of our clients, we aggregate daily reports of changes made to libraries or lists. And with that, we can set it to run every 24 hours, get one consolidated list of changes, and then send that out by email. A business process flow is something that's a little bit more advanced. This lets you tap into your common data sources. So if you're doing much work with Power Apps and other common data models, this really lets you integrate more within that space. But for the purposes of this first demo, we're going to start by a manual flow. So we're going to click on this. And the first thing we need to do is give it a name. Now, one thing I want to highlight here is that you want this name to be something that makes sense to an end user. Because ultimately, when they select their file and they go to start their workflow, they'll need to pick the name of the workflow. If your name is very long meaning 20 or more characters, part of your name will be cut off when they go into that menu. So you want to keep something very short and concise for the purposes here. So we'll say, we'll call this Spug Manager Approval. And within here, we'll say that we want this to be triggered for a selected file. Because in this case, we're uploading files into a library. And for a selected file, we want to take action. So we'll click on Create. And this will take us into the edit mode for this workflow. So within here, we want to give it a URL. Now, if you have a site that's been around for a while, you can just select it from the drop-down list. If this is a fresh site, you might just need to paste in the URL to your site. Both work equally as well. This pre-populated list is just a suggestion for what could be available. Same thing applies for libraries. If this is a brand new library, you might not see in your list yet, but you can always click on Enter a Custom Value and type in any name of the library that you have. For the purpose of this demo, we're going to pick our final drafts library that we've created. And we also have the option to add an additional input. So this means that when somebody goes and triggers this workflow to run, do we want to capture some additional information that could be provided to the approver or use at anywhere other point within the workflow? In this case, we might want to add a text field that actually just asks for a message. And we'll come in here, please inform your manager why they should approve this. This is just a little description that would appear when they see this pop up. We also have the ability to make this field optional. By default, the fields are required, but for the time being, we'll leave it as a required field. So now that we have this trigger in place, it's time for us to add an action. And the first way that we'll add an action is by clicking Add a New Step. And when I click Add a New Step, it's going to give me all of the available actions available across the board. Now, there's a lot of great ways that we can filter things down. We can look at some of the built-in controls. We can look at some of the standard ones, including most of your operations within Office 365. We can see premium connectors, which is where you might want to send something for a DocuSign or an Adobe sign-off. The premium connectors do require that extra license. So if you're looking to automate large-scale systems, you might want to double-check the licensing requirements for you there. So let's come back to standard. And what we really want to do is to get the properties behind this file. Because when we start with just a selected file, we only get some very basic information. We get where the file is stored, and we get the ID of the file. But in order for us to pull the metadata for who the user is that submitted the content, the file name, and so forth, we need to get file properties. So the great part about the search bar is that we can just start typing, and it will automatically filter down what we're looking to do. So within here, if we scroll down, we can see all of our options. The one that we need is to get the file properties. So we're going to click Get File Properties. And as repetitive as it is, we will be asked to enter in the information one more time. And then we'll need to enter an ID. So one thing you'll see in Flow is that many times when you go and fill in these fields, you'll get this dynamic content that pops up on the right side. And dynamic content typically lets you take advantage of previous actions and the data that they've pulled back. So in most cases, we'd be able to come in here and just pick the ID of the previous action as the ID that we want to get the file data for. Now, unfortunately, sometimes this doesn't work as expected. Sometimes the data type that is returned by a previous step is, let's say, a number in the case of an ID, whereas another step might require a string. So to be able to address this, we're going to add one more action above here. And this action is something called the compose action. And the compose action essentially takes a data type and it converts it into a way that could be usable with other data types. There's a little bit of voodoo magic behind the scenes for how this actually works, but we found this to be very useful. So we'll come in here, and as you can see here, because there's no data type filter within this field, it shows us all of the information that was retrieved by the previous step. The one that we're most interested in at this point is the file ID. So we'll pick that. And now that I come back down to the Get File Properties, I can get the outputs. Now I'm able to come back and I can change the names of these fields and make them look nice and clean. But for the purposes of today's demos, we want to focus on the core functionality. So within here, we have our compose file ID. We have the file properties. And the next thing we want to do is we want to get the profile information. Because if we're going to be routing this to the manager of the person that decides to start the workflow, the first thing we need to know is who this person is, and by extension, who their manager is. So we'll pick Get My Profile. And within Get My Profile, it'll pull the information of who's running the workflow. And then we'll add one more step. It says Get My Manager. If I type in Manager, I'll see the different options that come back. And Get Manager is the one that we need. And when I go to Get Manager, it's going to ask me which user to get the manager for. So I'm going to click into the user principal field. And then I'm going to scroll through my dynamic content on the right side. So one thing that you'll notice on the right side is that you'll have different headings available under the different dynamic fields available to you. So that way, as you scroll down, you'll be able to see where these variables are coming from. And things always flow from top to bottom. So if you're looking to pull a piece of data, it has to happen before you look to call for it. So we're going to come back up to the Get My Profile. We'll come down and we will pick the manager. Now, if you don't like scrolling or if you're looking to go a little bit faster, there's also a great search box here where we can type this in. So what do we need? We need the UPN, which is the username, principal name from my profile. We'll pick this here. And this way it'll know to go get the manager from my user principal. Okay, so we got it thus far. So the next step, now that we know who the manager is, we can add an approval step. So we're going to come in here and we're going to type in the word approval. And we'll get a number of different options. So for this case, we're not looking to just create an approval and end the workflow and have the approval function independently of this workflow. We actually want this workflow to determine what the outcome is of the approval and then send the appropriate notifications. So we'll come here and we'll select start and wait for an approval. And from here, we can pick the approval type. The two most common ones are, one is that everyone must approve if you're sending this to a set of people. Another one is the first to respond. In the real world, first to respond is typically the most commonly used one. But if you're ever sending a workflow that requires consensus of a body of people, then you might want to select the first one. So we'll say first to respond. And within here, we will start to fill this in. So what is the title of this approval that we want to send to the user? So we can come down here and maybe we can say that there's an approval request. And maybe we'll add the file name. So if I come in here and type in name, I can scroll down and pick the name of the file under the Get File Properties umbrella. And maybe we'll say for, and maybe we also want to provide the name of the person. So maybe we scroll up and under Get My Profile, we pick the display name. Who it's assigned to, we want to assign this to the manager. So under the manager, the mail field is automatically filtered as an appropriate item to assign to somebody. And in terms of the details and the item link and so forth, details, we can say, we have a message that we've requested at the very beginning when we started the workflow. We'll put that there. If we want a link to the item, we'll click in here and say link to item. And if we want the description, we could just make the description the file name. Now, this is using all out-of-the-box workflows. And as you can see here, most of using flows, adding actions, and filling in the different parameters that are there. So we're good here. And one more thing we might want to do, just to keep things smooth, maybe we want to add a parallel action so that when this is submitted, we can send an email to the submitter informing them that your request has been received. So maybe within here, we'll click on this plus icon and we'll decide to add a parallel branch. So a parallel branch lets you have multiple things happen in parallel, which makes it nice when you have different things that should not be dependent on each other. So we'll come in here, we'll go to standard, we'll say Office 365 Outlook, we'll pick send an email. We'll send an email to Get My Profile email. We'll say the subject of your submission for approval for blank for the file name has been accepted or has been received rather. We'll keep you posted. So that looks good. So we'll come back to this branch of starting the approval. And then we want to take action on the approval, right? We want to inform the initial person whether or not their submission was accepted. So we'll click here to add another action. And within here, we're going to go to control, which gives us some ability to do if statements, some ability to do some loops. And really, we want to come in here and pick this conditional control. And in the conditional control, we're going to come down here and we're going to say if the outcome of the approval is equal to approve, then we want to send an email, and we'll come in here and we will go back and pick the email to send. So we'll come in here, we'll send this to the person that submitted this. Your submission was approved. And within here, we can even specify who approved it. It was approved by. And if we look into this umbrella of the start and wait approval, we can see that there's an option for the approver name. So we have that here. And one thing you'll notice is that because there could be more than one potential approver, this automatically inserted this apply to each loop around this. Since we're only using the first approval as the path forward, this will only loop at most one time, but it gives us that option here. And similarly, we can also come back here and add the same kind of mail action for no, but I'll skip that for this demo. One more thing to note is that if you click on any of the headings within these flow actions, it actually collapses the details. So this way you can see an overarching view of what your flow looks like and then click into each one to really dive deeper into it. So we're going to save this flow. And after saving the flow, I always like to click on this flow checker in the top right corner. And the flow checker lets me go through and just verify if there's any kind of errors, if there's any kind of required fields that I missed, or if there's any warnings where if I'm trying to mismatch data types, or if my connection to one or more services has been expired. This is really helpful just as a quick sanity check. This won't give you every possible problem with your flow, but if you can't get past this flow checker, it's almost guaranteed that it's going to error out when you go to run your flow. So we click save, we're good to go here. And we see that it's saved. And I'll click the back button to go to the overview of this flow. One thing I want to point out is that when you click on this back button, it's almost guaranteed that you will get a message informing you that you have changes that you haven't saved. I find this to be inaccurate because even after I save it, this message comes up every time, but we can click OK because we know that we just saved it. Okay, so we're basically at this flow overview page. And if I wanted to get back to this page just at a later date, if I go back to Flows Home, click on My Flows, and click within My Flow, it'll take us here. So a few important things I want to point out. Within here, if I need to make further edits, I can click on the Edit button. If I want to invite others to become owners of this flow, I need to make sure that I save it and I share it out. Because by default, Microsoft Flows are owned by the person that created the flow. And if I create a flow that's for a business critical application and tomorrow I leave the organization or my contract is coming to an end, and if I don't make somebody else an owner, that flow will essentially stop working and will be soon after deleted, which is a problem. But if you share a flow, it becomes a team flow. And under My Flows, it would appear under the team flows category. In that case, somebody could take over once you're gone. But let's come back into here. So a few more great things here. We can save flows and we can make copies of flows. So this is great if you create a flow template and then you want to reuse it across multiple different sites. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. It's essentially like making your own local templates. If you make a flow that you think would be really useful and you'd like to submit it to the overall free marketplace, you also have that ability to do so. And furthermore, there's some abilities to get analytics or turn off flows if you don't need them running at the moment. A few more things to point out. So as flows are being executed, you'll see a list of all of your executions happening below, and we'll show you how that works in just a minute. On the right side, you see the number of different connections. So for every data source that you connect into, you will need to have a connection. Now, because I'm within Office 365, I'm already logged in and I'm interacting with Office 365 objects, it's not going to require me to re-authenticate. But if I was, for example, connecting to SurveyMonkey or another external application, I would have to provide my credentials that would be stored as part of a connection to this flow. And if I was to share this flow with somebody else, and I want them the ability to be able to make changes to the flow, I also have to separately share the connections with them as well. And below we have the owner information. So let's give this flow a run and let's see what it looks like. So to activate this flow, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to upload a document here. And I'm going to choose one of my buffalo wing recipes. So I'll drag that over here. And I'll give that a second. Okay. I'm not sure why that wasn't, click and drag is not working on me today, but we'll pick the file. That is interesting. All right. Give it one more shot. Every once in a while, you just have to close the browser window and come back into it. All right. So the interesting part with the screen sharing applications is that every so often when sharing your screen, some of the JavaScript in Chrome fails to render. We'll jump over to Classic View just for the purposes of this demo. And we'll upload the file and we'll come back into Modern. So let's give that a second to run. Just going to upload the buffalo wings, and we'll go back to the full experience. Okay, so now that we have a file here, remember we didn't set this flow to automatically run. We set this flow to be user initiated. So once a user selects their file, they could either click on flow in the top, or they can click on the three dots and pick their flow. In this case, this flow is called Spug Manager Approval. So we're going to click on that. We're going to see the different connections that the flow is using to work. And just below this, we're going to have this manager approval message. And this is the message that we added in that very beginning of the flow. We'll say, this is my best recipe, please approve. And we'll run the flow. So we see a message here that it started running. And if I jump back to the same page where we have the flow definition, and if I refresh it, we'll see that this flow is currently running. If I click into the flow, I can actually see where within the flow process it is. So we see these green check marks that things executed successfully. We can see the amount of time that each of these steps has taken. We can also see where the flow is currently pending, right? Because we have this approval that we started. We also have debug information if we click into it, and this gives us a little bit more insight for when we run into problems. And overall, this makes it a really easy way to see how things are going. And if something fails for some external factor, like for example, suppose I didn't have a manager defined and this failed at this step, I could always go back, fix the problem, and then rerun the flow without having to resubmit all of the parameters. So this is especially helpful if you have some long forms that are completed that you don't necessarily want to go and re-enter all of the data every time. But anyways, so let's take a look at this email. So the first thing is, did I get an email saying it's been received? And I have. I got an email saying that my buffalo wings recipe has been accepted, or received at least. And now the approval sits with my manager. So I'm going to switch over into my test user account, which is currently configured as my manager. And we see that I have this approval request sent a few seconds ago. It's basically saying this is my best recipe, please approve. I can click on it to go and look at it and open it up. If anyone is interested in this recipe, I would be more than happy to share it afterwards as well. And we'll give that a second to load. Anyways, as we come back here, one of the great parts about Flow is that we're able to come in here and we're able to approve or reject directly within your email without having to go into a separate form, which makes it really convenient, especially when you have people on the go. You're able to just do that without opening it. One more thing to point out here is that you can ask somebody to review something, and that doesn't automatically give them access to that file, right? Microsoft takes security very seriously, and if somebody doesn't have access, they won't get it just because you sent them a link to it. So in this case, we could request access, but in practicality for this demo, I'm just going to approve it. So as I click submit here, we can jump back to here. We can see a green check mark appear that this approval came through. And then within here, we see the conditional that this has gone through. It's going to send an email. And here's my email that just arrived. It was approved, and this was the user that approved it. So just to summarize this demo, we created a flow that runs when somebody selects the flow and says, we're ready to get this approved. We've included a custom message. We've built up some of the components so that we know who to send it for approval, as well as who should receive the email notifications. We've sent out an email information based on some of the metadata that we've collected as part of the earlier steps of this flow. We started the approval process, and upon this being approved, we sent out another email. So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to take any questions that are here, and we'll move on to the next demo shortly after.
Yeah, good stuff, Dimitri. We do have a couple of questions that have come in, and the first one is one that we often hear about, and that's relating to authentication for those connectors. So I'll just read the question as posted, and you can respond. Someone has to authenticate with all those connectors, SharePoint/Outlook, to run those connections/action with those credentials. Can we use a system account, which doesn't have a mailbox, that we create to run such action and not use an individual's account?
Great question. The answer is yes, you can, but that account will need to be licensed for the services that you're using. So one, they would need to have a free flow license that you can assign to them. But if they're going to be interacting with SharePoint content or sending out emails, they would need to have a license that gives them, at least SharePoint Online Plan 1 and Exchange Online Plan 1 for those activities.
Great. And then a follow-on question. I'm just summarizing your response in the reply here so we have it for the recording and whatnot. In relation to the question above, can we make the notification emails sent through Flow go from, in quotes, some email ID not belonging to a person? Like we used to have some email IDs in SharePoint, which were configured with site to use as a from email ID. So in other words, can you mask or send a generic from address?
Great question. So if I put this into edit mode, which we are, if I click on any of these actions, I can see the different connections that are available that is being used in order to take this specific action. So if I was to come in here, add a new connection, and enter, for example, a service account, by doing so, I'd be able to send this in the context of that other connection. So that would be the easiest way to do it. If you come in here and you look at the send email actions, you'll see that some of these actions are up to V2, some have V4, and some of these you can have multiple different ones side by side. It's very possible that in the future, Microsoft will add this as an option to maybe a V3 or V4 in the future. So certainly keep an eye on this. Don't just dismiss it as not being available natively. But as a workaround, using this other connection is the way to go. So
for your service account, for example, if you provision them a mailbox or gave them an email ID that was a generic, such as Contoso Flow or flow@contoso.com or something along those lines, that would serve as the from address in that context.
Exactly.
Great. Those are all the questions we have at the moment.
Okay, and I think I see one more question coming in from Mike. So Mike works in a K through 12 school district, and 99% of users will never be able to create their own flows. Is it possible to create flows and make them accessible for staff to add an approval flow? Great question. So flows by design need to be attached to some type of trigger. So you can come back into here. You can make a template, or you can save a copy or send a copy of a flow. And ultimately, you can have multiple of these flows that you create on behalf of the different users and connect it to the libraries that they choose. So you have that option. There's also an out-of-the-box option for shortcutting this request sign-off flow. So today, Microsoft automatically enters this into everyone's libraries. To the best of my knowledge, there isn't a way that we can automatically publish this as an option into every library. But keep an eye out at Ignite. Things are always changing in the space. The only challenge with this out-of-the-box request to sign-off is that it asks you who it needs to be sent for a sign-off. And although it's useful in some scenarios, in many cases, you want this to be predefined based on who they are and whether that goes to a manager or department head and so forth. So it's usually better to control that from a full flow perspective than it is just to ask users to click on it themselves.
So if I understand what Mike is asking here and your response, if the user doesn't have either the skill or the capability at the license level to create their own flows, you could create, you being the person who does have said permissions and licensing, could create that for them in the library that they desire. And with the ability now to share those as templates, you could create one and reuse it?
Absolutely.
Gotcha. Mike, if that didn't answer your question, please post a follow-up. Dimitri, why don't you go ahead and carry on?
All right, perfect. So let's go on to demo 2. So demo 2 is where we want to collect feedback from a Microsoft form survey and store that within a SharePoint list, as well as send an email notification. And this could be a very common scenario if you're looking to collect user feedback from your current user community. This could be great if you're looking to take a vote for where the team lunch should be held, or even if you need to have some type of compliance training where somebody has to go through, fill in a set of questions, and then on the back end, you want to use different flows to grade how well they did it and then take action on that behalf. So let's get started with this demo. So we're going to come back here. We're going to go back to our Office landing page, and we're going to start with Microsoft Forms. For those of you that haven't used Microsoft Forms, this is a great, easy to use ability to create SurveyMonkey-like forms, but even simpler. So we're going to come in here, and we can select a new form or quiz. We'll pick a new form for the time being. And we can name this form October 15th, SPUG, flow survey. And within here, we can enter an optional description, and then we can start adding some questions. So when you go to add a question, you have quite a few options with Microsoft Forms. You can do like a multi-select choice option. You can do a free text option. You can do a rating option where you can have different stars or numbers. You have the ability to pick dates, and there's a number of other ones that you can do here as well. For the purposes of this demo, we're just going to clean this up. We're going to make this a one-question survey, and this is going to be, what year was MS Flow introduced? We'll add a few options here. We'll say 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. And we'll add another option. And we're also going to make this as a required question. And we also have some other options where we can make this a drop-down instead of a radio option and so forth. So I think we look pretty good here. And if we're ready to preview it, we can click on preview. One of the great things about the survey tool here with Microsoft Forms is that you don't actually have to save your form. As you make changes, it is essentially reflected within your version of the item. So this is what this will look like. We're going to click back, and we're going to decide to start using this form. We do have a few more options, actually, that we might want to select. If we go into settings, we can make this anonymous, in which case we won't be able to record who has responded. But this might be good if you're doing like customer satisfaction surveys and things where you necessarily don't want to have people be more cautious with their responses. You also have the ones where only people in the organization, and in case we want to record the name, we can also limit it so that everyone can only vote one time. So we'll save this here, and by save it, we're just going to click away. We're going to see this autosave take effect here in the top portion. And there's really just one more thing I want to point out while we're here. If we click on the share link, we get this URL. If we copy the URL and we paste it into a notepad, we see that we have this, ID equals in this long character set. Every so often when we use Microsoft Flow, depending on how long it's been since the flow was created, you might have to copy and paste this ID into Flow. So I just want to point that out here. But anyways, so we have this here. Let's go give it a shot. Now, before we go into the flow, we also need to create a place for the survey results to live. And if we go into our Spug demo site, I've created a list just that has a few columns here. So we have a title column that comes with every list. We have a text field that says what year was flow created. And then we have the name of the responder just so that we have a way to track who created this. I will point out if you pick the anonymous option, the name of the responder will either come back as anonymous or your flow might fail, in which case you just need to add some more logic to your flow to only try to set that value if it has a valid content in it. So anyways, so we have this list, we have the form. Let's go ahead and build a flow. So we're going to come back here. We're going to go back to Microsoft Flow, and we're going to create a new flow. Press the Create button. And this time, since we want this to automatically happen as the surveys are submitted, we can click on the Automated Flow button. We'll give it a name. So we'll say October 15 Flow Survey. And within here, we can search triggers in case we want triggers from Microsoft Forms. And it happens to be the first one here. So we'll pick this and we'll click on the Create button. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to pick a form. And if I click on this drop down, our flow happens to be here. If our flow did not appear here, and I'll tell you it's like a 50-50 chance for whether or not it appears, you can go into custom value and you can paste in just this ID portion of your form. Of course, if you have the drop down available, it's easier just to click on it. So the first thing we get is when a response is submitted. Now, the next thing that we need to add is that we actually need to create a loop, because in the scenario that somebody submits multiple responses pretty quickly, the way the flow connector works is that there could be more than just one result coming in within a given set. So we'll come in here and we're going to go under control and we're going to do an apply to each. And within apply to each, we're going to click on this. We're going to get this dynamic content of the list of responses. And within the action, we need to pull one more form action here. If I type in form, I need to get the response details. It's going to ask me again what the name of the form is. I'm going to say this is the October 15th survey. These two have to match, otherwise this won't quite work the way we want it to. And within here, we want the list of response IDs. So it's a little bit of a quirk here to do this loop, but this is simply how the items were built by Microsoft. Okay, so now that we have the details of the response, we're going to add an action, and we're going to use a SharePoint list item. So we're going to type in the word item, and we're going to create an item. So keep in mind, in SharePoint world, lists contain items, libraries contain files. So since we're working with a list in this case, we're going to create an item. In the previous example, we were using files, so we would use all of the file-based commands, or actions rather, that are available. So we want to create an item. We're going to click into here. We're going to pick the Spug demo site that we've been using. We're going to pick the flow survey list that we have. And by picking the list, we're automatically going to have our different columns pre-populated here. So we have the title column, which is always required. There's a way you could, of course, change this, but for this demo, we're just going to pick the submission time being the title. We're going to pick the what year was flow introduced as the response, and we're going to pick the responder's email as the name of the responder. And from here, we can also add one more item where we can send an email to somebody essentially saying there's a new response added. I'm going to skip the step just for the purpose of saving a little bit of time, but we all know how to send emails with Flow. So here we have it. We click Save. And now we've built the form. We've built the list that's going to contain the data, and we've built the form the flow to connect the two pieces of it together. So one more thing I want to point out is that if we come back to our homepage here, one of the great things about Flow is that it's really easy to embed this onto a modern page. So if I click within here, oops, I might have to restart my browser if this doesn't play well. Okay. So I'm going to come into here, and I'm going to add the Microsoft Forms web part. This web part pretty much behaves the same way, where we can either paste the URL to it, or we can enter the ID. So we'll come in here, we'll grab the URL, paste it in, and we'll click OK. And now anybody that comes to my page is going to be able to see and take the survey. So this is really great if you're posting like a news article on your modern intranet and you want to embed a survey directly within it, or if this is your team site and you're taking a team survey. This makes it front and center and really easy to use without somebody having to check their email, click on a link, and so forth. So within here, we'll pick 2016, we'll click submit, and we can come on the back end and see how the flow is doing. So if I click back in the flow, we'll see that it ran 5 seconds ago. Clicking into here, we can see exactly how it ran. It collected one item here. It got the response details. It wrote it into the SharePoint list. And then if we come back into the SharePoint list, go to the flow survey results, we see that this was submitted just now. This is my response. This is my email. And then on top of here, we could build a separate flow if we wanted to take actions. And if the right answer was here, then maybe I add it to the list, or maybe I have another column that tells me number of correct answers. And then we could really build this up to act as a mini, testing tool per se. So this brings us to the conclusion of demo 2. I'll pause here if there's any questions.
Well, we did have one question come in, Dimitri, and that was around limiting the number of responses to the Microsoft form. So could you, the way I interpret that question, Paul did provide a response around limiting it per person, but is there any way to say 100 responses or only 150 or something along those lines?
Great question. So as you're building out your flow, you can do a few things, right? So if you know that this list will only be used to collect these results, you can create a flow that will check how many items are part of this list every time there's a new addition. And then from there, send a notification to have somebody come in and delete the form or remove the form from accepting submissions. I haven't tried it, but we could take a quick look. There might be an action available to close out a form. So let's type in forms to see if there's a way that we can even automate that one step further. So we can create the invitations. Yeah, so unfortunately, we can't automatically close it after a certain number of submissions. But using this methodology, we can send an alert to the owner of the form and ask them to go and close the submissions.
Okay, fair enough. And of course, as Paul mentioned there on the right, it says 1 response per person, so you can stop the people from submitting multiple responses.
Exactly.
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay, so let's go to demo number 3. So this is one of my favorite flows to demo. And this is how you can really simplify calling in sick. So say you wake up in the morning and you're just feeling like garbage and you're not going to be productive and it's better to stay home than get the rest of your office sick. And you really want to have a one-button click to go ahead, send your manager an email that you're out sick, block your Outlook calendars out of office, and cancel all of your current appointments for the day. Pretty nice, right? It's actually really simple to do with Microsoft Flow. And I'll show you how in this upcoming demo. So let's jump back over, and I'm going to go into my test user here. So within here, first thing I want to show you is my current calendar. So this is a test user, of course, but say within here, we have a performance review, we have TPS report reviews, we have new fax cover sheet reviews, a lot of other meetings that we're part of today, and we're just not having it. It's not going to be a good day. It's better to call it quits. So under this account, I'm going to come in here into Flow, and I'm going to create a new flow. Now with this flow, we want this to be a button, and I'll share the screen on my phone to demonstrate how this would run once we build a flow. But we'll come in here and we're going to call this I'm sick. And we'll say it's going to be a flow button for mobile. I'm going to click on create, and we're going to want to pull a few pieces of data points to make this work properly. So the first thing we want to do is pull my profile so that we can look up who my manager is, especially if we want to share this with multiple people. Oops, not update. I want to get. So get my profile. And then we want to add a step to get my manager. So this is very similar to the first demo where we need to get the manager's information so that we can send them a notification. So we're going to come down here. We're going to pick the user principal name. We're going to add another step. So the first thing we'll do is that we'll send an email. We'll send it to the manager. We'll say, I'm sick today. We'll say, don't worry, I canceled all of my meetings for today. Then we'll add a new step. So the next step is we want to block our calendar so that nobody tries to schedule new meetings for us since we're not going to be there to participate. So we'll click on create an event. We're going to pick the calendar to reflect the calendar. This is the default calendar that everyone sees when they check for your free busy availability. We'll call this out of office. I mean, depending on how your calendar is shared, you might want to, sick today. Start time. So if you're familiar with Excel formulas on a very basic level, there's this expression tab available to the right. And it looks a little scary at first, but once you start to think of this in terms of Excel, it's actually not too bad. So we want the start time to be now. So if I type in now, UTC now is the command for it. So we'll click OK there. And the end time, typically you might feel, not the best first thing in the morning. So we want to go back to expression and say we want to add a few hours to the now. So we could pick add hours. We can say UTC now. And let's say we add 12 hours because we're probably not going to be feeling better anytime soon. And then we need to pick a time zone. I'm on the Eastern time, so I will pick the Eastern time. So pretty simple. Now, the next thing we want to do is also cancel all of our existing meetings and send them a response. So we'll come in here and we will, first thing, we want to interact with our calendar. So I might click in here and scroll down. The name of the command is to get events. As you scroll down here, you see there's really a lot that you could do with what's available in here. But we want events for this purpose. And I'm just going to type it in. Get events. So we're going to get events. We're going to pick our calendar. We can have some advanced options where if we wanted to add additional queries and so forth, but for the time being, I'm just going to leave it as it is. And then I'm going to say for each event. So we're going to come in here, say apply to each. We're going to pick an output from the previous section, which is going to be the list of calendar items. And within here, we're going to add an action, and then we're going to delete the event. Now, generally speaking, if you do this tutorial, you probably want to add one more step and just verify that for each event, make sure that it's happening today before you cancel it. In this demo, we're essentially deleting all of our events, but that's okay because we're sick and we can deal with it later. So we're going to come in here. We're going to delete event. We're going to pick the calendar. We're going to pick the event ID of the current item, and we're going to click save. So in doing so, this gives us the ability to go ahead and remove our responsibilities for the day. Actually, one thing, instead of current item, we actually probably want this to be the ID of the event. So we'll click save here. And I want to show you how this works on the mobile app. So I am going to share my screen on my mobile phone now. And if you can see my screen here, I'm going to click on the Flow app. And the great part about the Flow app is that if you do have problems with different flows, you'll have the ability to see that in your feed here. You have the ability to see approvals across the top. But in this case, I'm going to go over to the Buttons tab. I'm going to refresh. And the I'm sick that we've just created is available here. I'm just going to click on it. It's going to tell me that it was started. And I'll jump back over into my view here so we can see how it's running. So we see this. It ran 9 seconds ago. It ran successfully. And if we come into our calendar and we refresh, we'll see that our entire calendar has been deleted for the day. And in parallel, we have an email that just came across from test user 2 to myself saying, I'm sick today. Don't worry, I canceled all of my meetings. So this is a really simple way you can automate some of your tasks, especially when you're not feeling the best. So it brings us to the end of demo 2. I'll pause here for any questions.
Yeah, we did get a question come in, Dimitri. If you delete a recurring event, it usually asks about the occurrence versus all. Is this a problem in your example?
Great question. I think that's something that you would need to test out. I'm not sure off the top of my head if that would do it recurringly or just for the current event.
I don't know either, as a matter of fact. Paul had to drop off, so I would give that one a try and see if it throws you an error in the response or if there's a default action for that. Great stuff. That's all the questions for the moment.
Okay. So I do have just a few more slides to close out with. So if there's if you're looking for more information, take a look at the Flow portal. That's flow.microsoft.com, or this more longer URL that's available on this slide. That'll take you to your home of Flow, where you're able to come in here and take a look to see what flows that you've created, actions pending on you, the different templates and connectors that are available. It's great to play around in here, and Microsoft has a lot of information around getting started and going through the basics at all different levels of how well and how comfortable you are with not just Flow, but workflows in general. There's also the Microsoft Flow Learning Resources Materials site, which gives you a lot more information. So this was a blog post by Jonathan Levesque from about a year ago, but a lot of great things to get started and really help you play around with the very different scenarios that are available out there. Last but not least, but the Microsoft Flow blog. You're going to see a lot of posts here coming from Ignite, but within here, there's just so much changing in Flow on an ongoing basis. When I started using Flow about 2.5 years ago now, it was very poorly documented. A lot of the things that you would expect to work didn't quite work the way you would want them to, but we're now at the point where I'm comfortable with Flow being a true enterprise-grade product, and it has the right level of debugging as well as the right level of actions to really be a useful tool in the arsenal. So, so thanks for attending today's session. Feel free to reach out to me at my contact information here, and I will be sharing a copy of this deck with Eric and team so that they can distribute it through the normal channels. Thank you, everyone.
That's great, Dimitri. Really appreciate that introduction to Microsoft Flow. A few final items for everyone. Pay attention to your emails. You'll be getting a notification when this webinar is posted as a recording. Should be sometime early part of next week. We'll get that out. Also look for an invitation to our Microsoft Ignite live webinar series that will be happening every day during Microsoft Ignite next month, where we'll bring you the latest and greatest of events happening there. As always, you can head to our website at dfwsharepoint.com for information on upcoming events. You can join the mailing list and get some information there as well. When we get the links from Dimitri, we will post those to the meeting notification on the website. So once again, thank you everybody for joining us. We appreciate it, and we look forward to, and a big thanks to all of our sponsors, of course, who make this happen, especially our platinum sponsors from K2 Training Plus, Sundown Solutions, and BinaryWave. We'll see you all next month live from Microsoft Ignite.